Merry Christmas, everybody. It's November 1st, and so that means two things. One, it's the first day of Christmas, and two, that the review embargo has been lifted for the brand new Star Wars book, Star Wars The High Republic, The Eye of Darkness by George Mann. This is the second Star Wars book review that we're getting to give that's spoiler-free, that we're getting to give early before the books come out. We are so grateful to Random House Worlds for sending both Colin and I a copy of The Eye of Darkness. This book was an awesome read, and we're really excited to jump in. You'll be able to find our spoiler-packed review on November 15th, 2023 on our regular podcast feed. But for now, let's hop into it to see what you can expect. This story follows an ensemble cast, which already made me gravitate towards the story. All of the High Republic books have so far followed an ensemble cast, all of the adult novels anyways. And, you know, over the past few years of Star Wars publishing, I've kind of felt like they've focused on what I call character study books. And while I really love a lot of those stories, the ensemble cast stories always feel much more Star Wars to me. They feel like the movies to me. And so, you know, while this review is spoiler-free, I'm going to be sharing lots of spoilers for phases 1 and 2 of the High Republic in this review. Just so you're aware going into this, if you are still chomping through phase 2 or you just haven't gotten around to the others and you want to avoid some spoilers, then you might find them in the video. The story of this book follows an ensemble cast as they wrestle with the creation of the Nihil Occlusion Zone. It's a section of space that's been cordoned off by the Nihil behind a seemingly impenetrable barrier. And as we've seen in the very recent Shadows of Starlight comic, the Jedi have implemented what they're calling the Guardian Protocols, which have required virtually every Jedi to return to Coruscant while the Jedi attempt to understand how to grapple with the threat of the Nameless. And the implications of the protocols are felt throughout this book. So kind of understanding these protocols, which are explained up front, are very important. And it begins to set up a much more secluded Jedi Order that we are familiar with when we watch the prequels. Because you see the High Republic Jedi Order, they're all over the galaxy, they've got outposts everywhere, they're very involved, while the prequel Jedi Order seems a lot more, you know, secluded on Coruscant. And so that's really where we see that start, is in this book with these Guardian Protocols. It shouldn't come as much of a surprise to anybody that this story follows many of the characters we've grown to love over Phase 1 of the High Republic. The story is set only 1 year after the final moments of Phase 1, and there are even characters who played minor roles in Phase 1 who are thrust into the spotlight for this story. This book really stood out to me because I think although I loved Phase 1, and I really enjoyed the mystery and tone of Phase 2, I think George Mann does an excellent job of weaving the high points of Phase 2 into this novel. So the book begins by establishing numerous plot threads that allow us to kind of get our bearings, where we're at in the galaxy at this time. We learn the whereabouts of and the survival status of a bunch of characters whose fates were left up in the air at the end of Phase 1. Mann also caps off the first quarter of the book with a really shocking event. It grabs your attention completely, and starting in the first chapter, he builds towards this moment. And this moment shows to demonstrate how powerful the Nihil are, how ruthless Marchion Ro is, and basically how hopeless the cause of the Jedi and the Republic is at this time. So the meat of the book does a great job of showing you the power dynamics and struggle between different individuals within both the Republic and the Nihil. It also provides a mix of hopeful and lighthearted moments with more serious and dire moments, because one of the groups you could be following could have just had a breakthrough or a really important victory, and then the very next chapter is about a different group who's despairing, they're reeling from a loss, something terrible just happened to them. This ebb and flow of victory and defeat felt in the story, it let me experience a range of emotions with these characters. I felt like I was living through their same experiences and their same highs and lows. During the story, many of the characters are completely in the dark about what the others are doing. This is for various reasons, but it lends an interesting dynamic where we see them aiding each other inadvertently and working together, whether they really realize it or not. I enjoy writing like this in Star Wars because it feels like it taps into the Force kind of guiding events, a concept that I've always really enjoyed in the will of the Force, being seen through the characters' actions. Another one of my favorite moments is this blossoming relationship we see between two characters who had pretty minimal interaction with each other in Phase 1, and as they continue to rely on each other and bounce ideas off of one another, we keep seeing their actions foster respect between the others, and they keep growing in respect and admiration between the two of them, deepening their already rich motivations that have been presented in this book. I think this book sticks the landing in a big way. I devoured it in 3 days, and by the end, I was desperately craving more story. With this being the first in a trilogy, it's not going to surprise anybody that we're left with a lot of cliffhangers to be resolved in the future. But the end of the book, like the entire story itself, leaves you with really mixed emotions. There are a lot of failures, a lot of dark moments towards the end of the book that are really dragging you down. But it's also punctuated by the classic hopefulness that you can expect, when reading about this many Jedi, in that they're not going to be giving up hope. And that's how the book ends. My criticisms are really far and few between. I thought it was a great way for us to begin Phase 3, and I thought that George Mann did a heck of a job with his first full-length adult Star Wars novel. I think maybe some of the pacing or maybe the ordering of chapters threw me off a bit. When a plot line felt like it needed a little more information, we left it instead, and we got 3 chapters that were unrelated to it until we got back to the story. And the chapters themselves are really short. So it made for easy and light reading, but I think some moments could have been deepened by spending a little more time on the scene or fleshing out the characters just a little bit better. But really, aside from these minor criticisms, I thought that the book was well worth the read, and it's going to receive, 8.5 Jocasta News from me. If you're asking what's next, there's a lot of Phase 3 on the horizon. With this being the first adult novel in this phase, we know there are 2 more along the way, and there's going to be young adult novels, junior novels, comics, and fingers crossed there's another audio drama, just like they released for Phase 1 and Phase 2. If you're expecting to hop into this story and you haven't read the other Phase 1 stories, I would really caution against it. Many of the interactions and motivations presuppose that you've not only read Phase 1 and familiarized yourself with those characters, but it also supposes that you understand the story from Phase 2 and why certain events played out the way they did. So I think to fully appreciate the story, you're going to need to have read, at minimum, the first 5 adult novels in the High Republic. But, there's a lot of information in the young adult novels and the comics that need to be picked up as well. So this wasn't George Mann's very first entry into a galaxy far, far away, or even his first entry into the High Republic. He's been in plenty of places that you can find his stories and work. They are peppered throughout the Star Wars galaxy. So if you really like this book and you like George Mann as an author, I hope that you will go pick up some of his other stories. I really hope that the list continues to grow for Star Wars stories that he writes. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts on Star Wars: The High Republic, The Eye of Darkness by George Mann. If you want to hear more about the book and what I thought more in depth, then do not forget to go to Star Wars Station Communication Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or right here on this YouTube channel, and hear mine and my co-host Colin's in-depth, spoiler-packed review of the book. If you want to read the book yourself, then you're going to be able to do that super soon on November 14th, 2023. And if you want to continue to help support the podcast, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, check out our podcast, leave a 5-star review over there, and head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Star Wars Station. We always appreciate any help that anybody can give to the station, to the podcast, because it helps us keep making cool Star Wars content for you guys. But until our next book review, until our next YouTube video, or until our next podcast, which should be recorded tomorrow, please, until next time, stay wizard.